And there we go. We are back again for another round.
Awesome. It's cold. And the dog is all sorts of angry because there's kids out flying a kite. So I don't know. We may just have to put up with her shenanigans here. So
That's fine.
yeah.
Randy had a good thread this morning on Twitter about how like we've gotten to this point where we no longer appreciate the imperfections in things. Like
Yeah.
we like he was talking about like the AI and all these various software programs that make pictures absolutely perfect. People that have like streams, podcasts, video casts, whatever, that are like picture perfect. There's no flaws. He's like, he was going on basically you lose a bit of the authenticity. He's like,
Yeah.
show me that grainy picture from the 80s with you and your grandparents that's got like a timestamp on it, or show me the podcast where the kid runs into the room while you're recording. Like, just let things be flawed and appreciate when things do have flaws.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because I've been craving that. So my heavy rotation on Sonos right now is I've been listening to 2 or 3 different lo-fi radio stations on Spotify. So some lo-fi jazz, some like lo-fi hip hop, and it just feels good. Like this just feels better. And then speaking of Randy, I told Randy, I'm like, I get that he's kind of experimenting with his YouTube content, which we have to do. You and I talked about it yesterday, but there's something so like pure about his content. And I said the only way I can describe it is the same reason why I like watching Saturday morning culinary shows on PBS, because they're just so pure. And you compare that to Food Network, and it's everything is like reshot, perfect angles, every word is scripted. Whereas with the PBS version, it's like, no, these are real cooks, we're just going to throw a camera in the kitchen and let them go. I'm like, this just feels so much better to be authentic.
Yeah.
But clearly I must be an outlier, because the fact that we overproduce things, and you and I have had this conversation about the popularity of quote reality TV, which is in no way real, but like these things get mass appeal. But to me, it's just a huge turnoff. Like, I just don't enjoy it. I like the true, authentic reality TV, which is very, very hard to find.
Yeah. Everything comes across so fake. Like, you see the people with their pictures on social media, and we talked about that in the early days of the podcast, like the people that put out that the curated view of their life, the perfectly staged pictures, and like they try to hide what happened beforehand. Whereas I have one friend, like, they put out the pictures of like them and their kids, and then they make the joke like, yeah, 3 minutes before this picture, I was screaming at the kids to stop fighting. I was, pushing my husband, come on, get in here and take a picture and smile nicely. And then, like what goes on behind the scenes before it's actually done.
Yeah.
And instead of hiding it, it's funny, like I'm reminded of this story when we went to go get our wedding rings, and we were at the jeweler, and we were picking out different things, and like I was behind a couple, choosing between a couple different materials, and and he's like, yeah, like, the white gold, the silver, the yellow gold rings, yeah, they're softer, and they're going to nick, they're going to, parts of them are going to wear away or whatnot over the years. But he's like, that's, the nicks, the imperfections, the changing of it is one way to look at your relationship, like, what you've weathered, what you've been through, and whatnot. And that always stuck with me, because I've admitted I am definitely a perfectionist, and any little imperfection drives me up a wall. And it's like, no, this thing is, it's going to get nicked up, it's going to get its scratches, there's parts of it that are going to wear away, but that's part of life.
It is, and it's actually what makes things beautiful. And I can't remember the Japanese term. Hold on, I gotta take my headphones off, headset off. So Evan Lapointe sent me this little dish. It's a ceramic dish. But you, so in Japan, there's this whole art of restoring things that are broken. So you can see it has like this kind of gold flux thing in there that's kind of put this back together. It's been
Yeah.
broken and put back together, and it's beautiful and it's amazing. But you're right. From like a cultural perspective, we've got this thought that everything has to be new and perfect, and it just sometimes you miss that like charm. And yeah, I mean, there's nice to having new things and kind of that new car smell and a new house with all the features, but sometimes it's like, you're in an area that's quite established, right? And the East Coast has these very old houses and buildings. There's just something, it just hits different walking into those places that feel like they have like a history and a story to tell.
Yeah. Like the house that we're selling, this house is 73 years old.
Mm,
And you see the marks and the improvements and the changes that each owner has put into it. And I mean, it's not hard to find a house that's 100 years old out here.
yeah. And when they do it right, those changes aren't hidden. They're part of the history and the fabric and the story, right? And
Yeah.
it's a beautiful thing. It's where it's done wrong, and I'm sure there's some parallels to analytics implementation and data capture. There is when it's not so beautiful, but when you care about it, obviously someone cared about this dish enough to put it back together. Like the scars and the history of it becomes incredibly beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about, our space specifically. You brought up digital analytics, so let's go ahead and segue into our topic for today. It is so easy to go out and just buy something new
Hmm.
instead of trying to fix, mend, maintain the programs that you already have. It's like, well, let's just throw it out and start all over. um there's teams, organizations, companies that are that are built around, let's just go ahead and rip and replace. People have built careers on just coming in, ripping and replacing. Um so as we do pivot into our topic, I want to start a new thread of episodes around this concept of, I have this theme, I'm calling it vendors or outcomes. So think about it like, are you focused on the outcomes of your work, or are you just focused on the vendors involved? And that could take multiple things. So for today, I want to talk about, um, are you buying a specific tool, a specific suite of software because of the logo, or are you buying the tool because it gives you the outcomes you want and need? So, we're kind of going between like the philosophical part of life and, you know, work and our space. But when you think about buying stuff, like buying because of the logo, buying because of the brand, is a concept that permeates all facets of life. So whether it's shoes,
Yeah.
cars, computers, phones, everything, the brand, the logo on it means so much. And there's multiple reasons. It denotes value. It conveys status.
Hmm.
Because do you remember the early iPod ads?
Oh yeah.
It was like the silhouette, and you just had the white,
Yeah.
earbuds. At that point they were, still corded, coming down, and it was just that, like that whole thing. It was so simple, but it conveyed the value. People wanted the white earbuds because, hey, I have an iPod. I
Hmm.
don't have a generic MP3 player. Like that was the status symbol in the mid 2000s. Um, so looking at, our specific space, like this is something that I don't know if people think that much about. Like, are you buying something because of the vendor involved and saying, I'm using this tool now, or are you truly evaluating it that it's going to solve your problems?
Yeah, and so much to unpack there, and just go back to your how you started off, kind of rip and replace, rebuild. Um, I think it does happen a lot, and it happens sometimes completely out of control of the current ownership, and sometimes completely in control of the current ownership. And I know this isn't the topic of conversation, but I think it's important to recognize that sometimes the current homeowners are dealing with so much, what's the right word? Lack of care of the home from the previous owners, that they have no other choice, right? Those that choose rip and replace, I think, deserve a lot of credit, because it's not an easy decision to make. It could be, let's just go along with the flow. We actually have a couple current clients right now that are in that situation, that are facing a tear it down and rebuild, and it's simply because the previous owners lacked care of the house, and now they're kind of left with this thing that, where you been, that can't be sustained any longer. But the other side of it is, those that come in and have a choice, and they're doing it because of ego, right? Like, I have to redo this in my image. No one else could have done as good a job as me, so I'm throwing out everything else and rebuild. That's where we run into lots of problems. But as far as this discussion goes around, are you buying the tool because of the name? I think you bring up a lot of really good points around status and around comfort. And, the old saying in services was always, well, you never get fired for hiring, IBM, right? And so there's
You never
definitely,
get fired for hiring Accenture.
yep, and Ernst and Young, and there's a handful in our space that it's like, it's a very comfortable thing, and so that's why these name brands are hired, and I completely understand it. And sometimes it's deserved, sometimes it's created through marketing, and sometimes it was deserved, but they've no longer kept up with that. And I think IBM is a great example. Accenture is a great example. Maybe at one point in time in their history, they earned the right to have that trust, but it's not there anymore, at least not from an analytics perspective. They're just kind of resting on their laurels, as they say. So I think it's important to understand why that name brand gets that appeal. And I think in our mass marketing world, a lot of that is manufactured, right? We manufacture the importance of it, whether it's, shoes or electronics or whatever you have. A lot of that is through marketing appeal. I think, what were the headphones that Apple bought? Beats, that did a really fantastic job with it, right? They created some incredible marketing campaigns that it's like, I have to have these headphones. But on the flip side, you have headphones, you have cookware, you have cars, you have other things that you may not ever even see in marketing. They're not even creating any kind of marketing, but are so highly sought after and are seen as a status symbol, not because marketing has created that, but because their influence and their design and their utility have created that by itself. And I think that's a really important differentiator. So, are the tools that I'm using, or is the vendor I'm using, is it because it's a hot, trendy thing because of marketing? And I can think of a couple in our space, which I'm not going to name. Or is it because they've earn that right? They've let their product do the talking for them, because it is such an elite product that, yeah, maybe they've got some marketing to kind of keep the momentum, but the mass appeal, this almost cult-like nature of using some of these products, comes from the actual just incredibly high quality and utility of the product. Sorry, that was a lot of rambling.
No, it's good, because you bring up a good point. Like, there were a couple brands, I was thinking of that, like, you don't need to know, or you don't need a commercial to find out about them. You just know. Like, I don't know, like, one, I'm thinking of, like, coffee makers. I haven't seen a commercial for Breville in ages. I mean, I may
Mm,
not be watching or reading the right things to get an ad for it. But, like, because everybody talks about their Breville coffee maker, just a simple appliance.
yep. Yep. And there's another one. I think Rocket is another one in that space that are incredibly just well built, well designed. People gush over owning them. It is a bit of a status symbol, but you don't see any ads for it. You don't flip open your in-flight magazine. they just find their utility through some other ways. And not to say that they're not focusing on brand, right? I think they definitely are thinking about it, but they're not putting their emphasis on ad spend. Instead, they're putting it into R&D and then cultivating a strong buyer network that, in essence, I guess that is marketing, right? It's just a different flavor of marketing where they're not out there kind of, what is the beating their own, no, tooting their own horn? Is it? I don't know.
Tooting their own horn, yeah.
And so it just kind of hits different. And say what you will about Tesla, but Tesla's a great example of it. Their marketing budget on paid marketing is, you want to take a guess?
Zero.
Just think of the last time you saw a Tesla commercial on TV or an ad online, or
Yeah, I just realized. Yeah, that's one. Yeah,
or isn't
I have it.
Right. So it definitely can be done. And I think that, it obviously is a very valid way of brand building and positioning in any space. But again, coming back to our conversation from an analytics perspective, are we buying the tools because it's the thing to have, it's a status symbol? I think all of those things are completely fine. It's a safe bet. Like, you don't get fired for buying X. I think all of those things are perfectly fine reasons to buy things. My bigger question is, has that brand earned that through reputation, through R&D, through having quality products, or have they bought that through pumping a ton of money into marketing, paid marketing campaigns? And again, I don't want people to attack us saying, oh, paid marketing. Oh, Brevin, yeah. Will you close my door? Huh? Will you close my door? Yeah.
Talking about imperfections.
Talking about imperfections. Yeah. I'm like, why is the dog crying? No. Go out.
Yeah, talking about just showing, real life as we're recording.
I'm like, why is she crying at the door? Okay, Brevin came home.
Nice.
Yeah, so is that not? And I'm not saying paid marketing is bad. I think it's obviously
it's necessary. That's how you find out about a product.
But again, is that kind of allure of the brand? Is it primarily because you bought it and it's not sustainable? Because the minute you turn that marketing faucet off, it goes away. Or is it earned and the marketing budget is helping further elevate and get broader exposure of that brand?
Yeah. I'm trying to think, where do I want to go with this? Because I think we can continue.
Well, let's go to outcomes, because I think it ties into outcomes. And I think it says a lot about the tools you're selecting to buy. If we're buying the tools because it's the hot trendy, we went to this conference or we hung out with so-and-so and like everybody's using this tool, so we have to use it. It's like, where in any of what you just said did we talk about the outcomes that we're looking to drive from this tool? I mean, it's a huge red flag. So I think your topic title for today's episode is spot on. Is it that not necessarily are we buying the logo, because I think a lot of times we do buy the logo, but for very valid reasons. The question is kind of flipped. Are we buying the logo because it helps us get to our desired outcome? Or are we buying the logo because we want to be wearing Beats and all the other cool kids are wearing Beats? That really, in my mind, is the big differential in how we pose that question.
Yeah. Have you ever encountered that, throughout your career, where someone said, to put it the way you just said it, like, hey, I went to this conference and everybody's talking about this particular brand, we need to bring them in, or I know XYZ's company is using it, so we got to use it as well?
The latter. So when I was client side, and I think it came from a place of being well intentioned, but man, I had been putting so much work into building our data infrastructure. And one day, one of the senior managers pulled me aside. He's like, "Oh, so I went out to lunch with a buddy of mine who works over at blah 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 blah." I'm like, uh-huh. He's like, "Yeah, so they just deployed Crazy Egg. Like, it's like transformational to their business. So like, let's just stop everything we're doing and put Crazy Egg on the site." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Like, we're like, yeah. So I mean, that's probably a humorous outlier, but that did happen. But I think to the broader question, it happens all the time, and it's one of the reasons why vendors have these big flash sheets. We have, I don't know when this is going to air, after Summit. We have Adobe
Gonna
Summit
air
coming
during
up
Summit. Yeah.
during Summit. Not to blame Adobe, because all of the big vendors are doing it.
Yeah, it was coincidence, by the way, that
Yeah,
we're recording. Yeah, we're
co-
airing this
com-
then.
completely coincidental. But all of these big vendors have found out that these quote unquote user conferences are much more valuable as big marketing events. And then that's what they've turned into. And they get people excited. They kind of show new tools and new stuff, and people see that, and then they go back home like, well, we have to have it. Oh, you should have seen what, oh, it's so cool. And I remember going to, we were out in Mountain View at a Google event. This was a long time ago. And they were showing something about one of the Google Analytics add-ons that did this like really fancy visitor stitching, and where everyone's like, "Oh, we got to go back home." It wasn't. I don't think it was real. I think it was kind of faked demos. But a lot of those things are. Having been on the other side of it, a lot of those demos are faked. And so, but they do such a good job of faking it. People are like, oh, we got to go home and get budget to buy this thing.
I've been on that side too, and yes, that is one of the the secrets of the trade is a lot of those demos are held together with spit and duct tape.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's not even demos. Um, I remember being out in, where were we? I don't know, somewhere in the Bay Area at the where were we? Moffett Airfield. Is that out in Northern California? Anyway, I was in this old Zeppelin hangar. We were out at the Siebel User Week, and my boss was actually doing a demo there. And he ended up doing it live. And speaking of not perfect, it had a glitch, but he said something like, "It's okay. I would much rather do this than what I was pressured to do." And that was put together basically a PowerPoint presentation that looked like the product. And we faked it. Yeah, a lot of those times, because it's high pressure, but a lot of times the functionality isn't always fully baked to where they want it to be. And so you kind of have to fake it till you make it. But it works, right? And people go back and they say we have to have it. It reminds me a lot I used to go to the state fair every year in Utah because my grandparents would take me. And I'm like, why do we come home from the state fair every year with like this like new device that chops vegetables faster? And those guys that wore the headset and did the demos and they're up there talking, like, oh, it's so compelling, right? It's like, well, I have to have that. And then you have a kitchen full of like these like trinkets and gadgets. And that's kind of what happens in the MarTech space. Again, look at that slide of the MarTech landscape with the 80 million different offerings, and so many of these companies are so good at doing the slap chop commercial that you see it at a conference or an event. It's like, well, I got to buy that.
Yeah,
But we don't think about what we're trying to solve for.
yeah. Well, you bring up a great point because I was trying to find a way to pivot to this. What are some questions somebody can ask, who's in digital marketing? So it's, zoom back in on digital marketing. What are some questions somebody could ask themselves as a check to make sure that, hey, I want to be focused on the outcomes. How do I make sure I don't fall for the glitzy marketing or the shiny brand name?
I mean, I think that's it, is to ask what we're trying to solve for. So when we start to get, when we see that fancy and a well-produced infomercial and we're like ready to, pick up our phone, this is, dating me, and place that order for that new thing we just have to have. We need to ask ourselves, are we buying it because we're feeling enticed and like, this seems really cool? Or is this really going to solve a need, a pain point, a purpose in what it is that I'm trying to do either today, or does it fit my vision for the future and where I'm trying to take the organization? The trap is oftentimes we want it so bad that we convince ourselves that it's one
Mhm.
thing when it's not. And I think, we all have, if we're being honest with ourselves, we all have something in our house that we convinced ourselves we just had to have because it did X, and we were completely lying to ourselves that we just wanted to have it because it demoed so cool, or everyone else has it, so we need to have it.
It's human nature.
It is, and that's why these pitches work so well. But slow down. Slow down. Nothing that we're doing is really that critical that we have to make decisions at the state fair to buy from the guy, hawking the thing that chops vegetables super fast. Like, we can go home and research and ask questions, and so slow down. And I know we're not necessarily talking red flags here, but it's one of the things we've talked about on previous episodes that, if you have a vendor, if you have a demo, if you have a salesperson you're working with and they're saying, well, this is like a flash sale. We didn't even think we were going to have this. So, like, really limited time. We have to get this done right now. Alarm bells, flashing lights should be going off. That's like, wait a minute, I probably don't need this. if
Yeah.
if I have to make a decision right now on this thing, it's probably something that is an impulse buy and I really don't need. And we're going to feel good, right? Anytime we buy stuff, and well, unless we have that buyer's remorse period, we feel good. It's like, oh, I got my. Do you remember the episode of Seinfeld where he buys the leather jacket?
Yep.
And he literally is in his pajamas at like midnight watching TV, sitting on the couch with the leather jacket on, because it's like, I just can't take it off. It feels so cool. Like, we have that, right? Like, that newness, and it just feels so cool to have this new thing. But eventually it always wears off. And so if we bought it for that like excitement of the purchase and not for the excitement of the process of what that was going to enable us to do from an outcomes perspective, eventually we're going to get tired of it. And that curve is pretty sharp. It doesn't take long for us to be like, I guess I didn't really need to buy that thing. Let's put it in the corner with everything else that we bought that we didn't need. Unfortunately, in business, it's not like we're just taking up space in our house with stuff collecting dust. It's tech debt. We still, like, someone has to maintain it. We're paying for it. It's, slowing down our website. We have it causes all sorts of problems. So it's not as innocuous as it would be for us buying kitchen gadgets and trinkets, as it is, in the business, where it's got some pretty substantial overhead costs that we don't think about until it becomes so overwhelming. We've often talked about the hoarder example where literally we have stuff falling in on ourselves. We can't. Why does our website take 2 minutes to load? This is crazy.
Yeah. And so, have you ever heard of like some of those mechanisms they give people who are like compulsive buyers?
No.
One of the things they say is if you have credit cards and you're a compulsive buyer. Now, again, this is going to date me as well, because nowadays you've got your credit card saved in all of your accounts. You've got Apple Pay, stuff like that. But what they would say is take your credit cards and freeze them in a block of ice in the freezer. Seriously, like get a little container, fill with water, put your credit cards in, put it in the freezer. So this way, like, especially like because people use their credit cards for the big purchases.
Yeah.
If you really want it,
You gotta
take it
out.
out, let it defrost and let it melt, because like by the time, like, if you really need it, by the time it melted, you would still need it. Where if it was more of a want, or, oh, that looks cool, by the time that block of ice would melt, the idea is you'd be past that initial, like, I need it, and you probably talked yourself out of it and you're done.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I had never heard of that. It's funny.
oh yeah, like that's a common thing they tell people, like, if you got compulsive spending, have maybe a debit card with a little bit of cash saved in, well, they updated for now is have that saved in like your Amazon account or something like that. So you have a small amount of money to spend, but like credit cards where you would put a large purchase on, hide them, in the freezer.
Yeah.
And then this way it slows down that, oh, let me go buy it and put it on the credit card.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example for the business world that it is important to have a bit of a cooling down period, because sales and marketing has become so optimized that it is so easy to buy. It is so easy to buy. And again, I want to be careful here, because I don't want to say that buying tools and frameworks and whatever isn't a good thing. Absolutely. Having the right tool is incredibly important. But the right tool often takes time to evaluate and find what works for you. And just because it's the right tool for you doesn't mean it's the right tool for me. And both tools, the tool may be perfectly fine. It's a lot of times it's personal preference. It's how you're going to use it. It's your personal, likes and whatnot. And I think a lot about my knife collection that I've acquired over the years in the kitchen. Deciding to upgrade to a high quality set of chef knives was game changing for me in the kitchen. So to say tools aren't important, is not true. Going from a cheap Walmart knife to cut vegetables to going to a high end proper chef knife, it just completely changes everything. And so having the right tool is important, but it's also expensive. Each knife is $150, $200. It's not cheap. Where you could buy, a collection of 50 knives from Walmart for $100. Um, and so you have to research and find which ones you like. And while the knife I love, I know people that don't love it, and it's not because the knife isn't an amazing tool. It's they don't like how it feels in their hand, or for the type of things they do, it may not be the right fit. And so that's what we're talking about in the tool space, in the digital analytics and larger MarTech space. These tools, even, and I don't want to, well, maybe I'll throw out numbers, but it's not fair, because what may be expensive or inexpensive to a enterprise company may be incredibly expensive to a mid-market company. But we work with large enterprise brands, and so $50,000 for a tool oftentimes is so small it doesn't even show up on any balance sheets anywhere. But for a small company, that could be a massive investment. But it doesn't matter. Like, regardless of the price, these tools are expensive. Whether you're a big company or a small company, it's not like we're just, I'm going to date myself again. Do you remember, and I can't believe we did this, but do you remember, do they call them gas stations in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Like what Wawa, the convenience stores.
Well, Wawa's a convenience store that in the last 10 years has gotten also into having, like, they call them super Wawas. So it's the convenience store and the gas station.
I'm thinking, so in our neighborhood, we had this little gas station that had a couple pumps, and then in there was a couple of video game, cabinets. There was like the candy aisle and
Yeah, I know the type that you're talking about. Yeah.
like that. But when I was young, they had the penny candies, like the Swedish fish, and they literally had them in a box with the box open, and then you would go in there with your grubby little hands and
Mhm.
pick out like 10 Swedish fish and put them in a bag and pay 10 cents for it. Like, that was gross. We really did that.
We did.
Um,
And we
that
survived.
was also a time that our parents' cars didn't have seatbelts either. It's good we have seatbelts now.
Yeah. My brother would stand up in between like, we had a car with a back bench, and I'd be sitting in one seat, my sister would be on the other side, my brother would be in the middle, and every now and then he would stand up. Like, this is mid 80s. Stand up with his hands on either the front seat. I'm
Yeah,
like, dear
crazy.
God, if these days, if he's not down in a 5-point harness, you're getting pulled
Yeah,
over.
I
He's standing up.
not only a 5-point harness, the car seat has to have like certain rules, and like not even every 5-point harness is good enough. So anyway, I'm going down on a huge tangent here. So it's
Oh,
not
it's
like
the
we're
80s.
running into the convenience store and buying some cheap candy. These are substantial purchases, and so we should treat them as such, right? Because it's like, I got a handful of whatever those Sour Patch Kids were, and they were gross. I'm out a few cents, whatever. No, like, these are substantial purposes that have real impact, and we should treat them as such. But unfortunately, a lot of times they are treated as the cash register. I didn't plan on buying this, but now that I see the candy right there, I'm going to have an impulse purchase. These shouldn't be looked at as impulse purchases, but so often they are. And then companies stand back and scratch their hands like, why aren't we getting any value out of this? It's like, well, we didn't come to the store to buy this, but we walked away with it anyway. We have no idea how we were going to use it. So yeah, there's no big mystery here. So again, I love the title that you came up with, because we need to start for future and come backwards, rather than saying, oh, I want this now because it feels good. It's like, no, like, what are we trying to solve for, and does this tool have the utility and the quality and the design to solve for what we're trying to solve for? And that's really where the discussion needs to be centered.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Um, and I mean, I have so many thoughts there, because it has become that easy. And we we've talked about the hoarding example of how cheap data storage has gotten. So people
Hmm.
just they just over engineer their implementations. And I think the same thing. It's like, well, we could put this up, and we're getting GA 360 for free with our with this package with Google, so we'll have Adobe and GA on the site. And no one's really maintaining any of it. I think that's ultimately the problem,
Yeah.
though, with this, when people stop focusing on the outcomes and and just focus on having the logos. It's like, yeah, we're using GA, we're using Adobe, we're using this, we're using that, we're using Hotjar. And but are you really? And because you have so many, you can't maintain them all.
No, you can. I'm going to avoid myself going down the less is more route, but you bring that up, right? In that there was a time where I don't know if it was storage cost driven, but there was something driving the very small amount of customization we could do to our analytics tools, and I thought that was an absolutely good thing because it forced us to have the discussion of do we need this or not. But now when it's like pretty much open ended, no one has that discussion anymore. It's like, yeah, let's just get it. And then we just end up with more and more stuff that we can't support. But to your point, there's also kind of this NASCAR slide component to it, right? That it's here are all the cool technologies that we're deploying, and a lot of times the driver for that is we want to talk about how all the cool stuff we have is, and I think that you can find it's not it's again it's more human nature than it is something a problem with our space, because I think you can find this anywhere, and I'm seeing this in the guitar space. I'm learning to play the guitar, and there's a subculture of guitar players that it's literally about the stuff, right? You go to their YouTube channel and they can go on for 5 minutes about the name brand this and that and this pedal and that pedal and then the name of this, and I'm like, but you don't know how to play the guitar. Well, no,
Yeah.
but I got all this cool stuff, right? And then you got some old timer that has some beat up old guitar and some no name amp from the 40s, and he's cranking out incredible music. Like, dude, tell me about your technical setup. He's like, well, I got this amp here and I got the guitar. So, you know, and again, not to say that adding in those other things isn't important, but what's the driver? Are we getting all that stuff because we like to talk about all the technology and tools and stuff we have and the brand names on it? Or are we doing it because we're solving a very specific need and we know that there's that one unique guitar pedal out there by this one manufacturer that fits everything that I'm trying to do from a vision standpoint for how I play the guitar? That's the differentiator, and it's true across industries, across hobbies. This is how it plays out, and so I'm hoping that we can recognize this in our own lives, because I think we probably have been in that scenario once or twice ourselves. And if we're now in a position to own and drive an analytics strategy and organization, it really is in our benefit to avoid those traps, because it might sound cool to show up at an event and talk about like all the gear we have, but ultimately, what, people don't remember the gear, they remember how you made them feel by the song you played.
Yeah.
And that's the difference.
Yeah. And to give an example from my side of things, my wife and I are on this huge decluttering this huge decluttering kick. That's what I was trying to say. With the move, we're really going through stuff that we've been holding on to for a while, that came, followed me from my parents' house to apartment to apartment to apartment to this house and whatnot. I'm like, no, I gotta, it's time to part with it. And she shared this meme, or yeah, this meme yesterday, where it's like, you know, I've come to realize that the second half of, you know, my life is about decluttering all of the stuff that isn't directly related to people from the first half of my life. Or no, I'm
Mm.
butchering it. I'm going to have to post it. But it was, I'm coming to realize that the second half of my life is decluttering from all of the non-people related stuff that I feverishly collected for the first half of my life.
That's deep.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what, like, we how many organizations do we come into and they have massive data integrity issues because just buy, the next vendor, the next logo, this brand is going to fix our problem. And so they just bought it because it's the logo. This brand does this great, so we're just going to buy it without really thinking, to your point early on, has that brand earned the reputation, or, are we, do we have the other pieces in place to make sure it solves our problem? We've come into many engagements where they've had that problem because
Yeah.
they just went out and bought the hottest brand to fix their problems, but it's not fixing their underlying issues.
I'm going to ask you a question about your decluttering at the risk of your answer not supporting my narrative, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So, as you've been going through that activity, um, and let's say it's not time based, let's say it's not, well, this is X years old, so I'm getting rid of it. What criteria are you using to say this is something I'm keeping versus, it's an easy decision to toss this?
Couple things. So there's a couple different pieces of criteria that's being used. One, have I used it recently? And
Good one.
depending upon the object, recently could be 6 months, recently could be a couple years, depending upon, like, if it's something seasonal related, like something that you would only use in spring or in winter or something like that. Like if I bought something to do outside and it can only be done at certain points of the year, if I haven't used it in a couple years, it's on the chopping block.
Okay. That's
If
a good
it's
one.
something that, what's that?
That's a good one.
But if it's, say, something that, like, there was a pair of workout sneakers that I haven't used in 2 years, and they were still in decent condition, but because they were still half decent, like, I never threw them away. But I'm like, I'm not really going to wear those shoes. I've transitioned from those kinds of shoes to a newer kind of running shoe, so I'm not going back to that. So it was like, yeah, it's time to part with these as well. And I'll leave you with one other deep thought. As I was going through, like, I was finding stuff that I was holding on to from my youth for one stupid reason or another, or, oh, this is cool, this is a good collector's item. I had this epiphany when I was working out in the garage a couple months ago. And, some of these things, again, I've been just holding on to and have just had packed away before I got married, before I started a family. And I'm standing there, I'm holding a bunch of these things, and I'm like, am I really going to take these with me? And it was this moment of, how can I have space for new things now that I have a kid, now that I'm married, now that she has her own things, if I'm still holding on to and, taking up space with stuff that I haven't used in years, and I'm holding on to because it's a collector's item. It's a collector's item
Mm.
sitting in an effing box. It was one of these moments where it's like, I used it, I enjoyed it, I have the memories of using it. It can go.
So the one thing I was thinking about is build quality, because I think it's kind of very pertinent to both conversations. In that whenever you're kind of decluttering or cleaning out, and I've done this in my own life, I've done this when I cleaned out my grandparents' home when they passed. In theirs it was a lot more difficult because they bought very few things, but the things they bought were, well, the things they had were either something they paid an incredibly high dollar value for, or were passed down from their parents or their parents' parents, just so high quality that it was hard to kind of segment out, because it's like, wow, this stuff can go on for a few more generations.
Yeah.
Whereas in my house, like if we were to kind of declutter, uh, yeah, there'd be some hard decisions, but a lot of it would be pretty easy. It's like, I don't need all this junk. Like, this is some cheap thing I bought because I thought I needed it this one time, or this one thing I bought and it's already fallen apart a year later. It's a lot easier to have that conversation. And the same is true in our stacks, right? That we can buy cheap and dirty, and it's like an impulse buy, but a lot of times those things don't stand the test of time. Whereas if you buy high quality, these are things that can be passed on. And this kind of ties us back to the start of our conversation. If we do this right, we should have pride of ownership that gets passed on well past our tenure at that employer. And hopefully if our employer hires correctly, they can see what, wow, this person before me bought this incredibly beautiful thing. I want to take care of this because I want to now be able to pass this down to the person that comes after me. I think we need to get back to that a little bit, because we've kind of gone the opposite approach of, let's just buy whatever we want to buy, slap it together, because we know that the next person that's going to come in is going to rip it out and throw their own thing in anyways. What would it look like if we got back to that sense of really pride of ownership and buying incredibly high quality things that we have a vested interest in maintaining, not just for our tenure, but to hand it down to the next generation and the next generation? Kind of going back to the start of our conversation, it just hits different when you walk in this old house that has been
Yeah.
maintained passed from owner to owner. It's just incredibly beautiful.
Yeah. So to answer your question about build quality with my specific personal example, if we decided to part with something, the next piece is it in good quality? What's the value behind it? It's not, immediately throw it in, throw it out. We'd start reaching out to family. Does anybody want this? And there are many cases where it's like, we no longer have a use for this, but it's still in great condition. It's a high quality object or item, and a lot of people have come and pick stuff up too. So yeah, that definitely plays a part. And I see your point with this. If people started focusing and kind of like what we were talking about at one point, like really checking themselves as they're starting to evaluate bringing in a new vendor, that, am I buying this because it gives me the outcomes that I need? And then to your point with sustainable analytics, this is something I can maintain and have, and keep a level of integrity with it. I don't need to constantly be buying.
No, and there really shouldn't be a need for that if we do this right. But again, we haven't. And so I think it's a big leap to go from where we are today to getting to that point, but we can get there. And I think it starts with us as individuals. Like, we don't need to change the entire culture of organizations. I think organizational culture will change if at an individual level we take a lot more pride and ownership of the things that we're building in our analytics practices. And that organizations that are hiring also adopt that as a core principle for how they want to operate, because it takes both. Because we can take an incredible amount of pride in maintaining our home, but the minute we sell it, if we don't sell it to someone that has that same level of pride, they can destroy that in an instant. And so it takes both, right? It takes us having the pride to maintain what we build. And then it takes the business finding the right new owner of that product when we go on to a new employer. And if we don't have that, this becomes incredibly fragile. But I think
Mhm.
it can happen, but not happen if we don't have these conversations and we don't prioritize it as something that we see as incredibly important. If we don't do it, we know the outcome. The outcome is what we see today, in a constant state of tear down and replace. And again, in some cases, we have no other choice but to do that. Um, but in others, it's just because it's what we do. I don't really care for what the last person built. Maybe the last person built it in a way that is not good, so we got to tear. It's a vicious cycle that is keeping us locked in to doing unnecessary work, build and repairs, rather than spending our time doing minimal but cadence of maintenance, and then spending the rest of our time actually using the tools that we have to create incredible business value. We're not doing that today. We're not doing it to the level that we could be doing it at.
Correct. And I have one question to ask you before we wrap up. But before I say that, like, one of the biggest problems I see is the short tenure
Mm-hmm.
of people in digital analytics. Several years ago, I heard like the average tenure was 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious to know if that's changed, if that's gotten longer or if that's gotten shorter. Um, I've been working for you for 8 years now. Like, that's
Crazy.
unheard of in our space,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
And because normally it's 18 months, so you have these people that are constantly coming and going, and it's hard, like I don't know, it's not that it's hard, it's maintenance becomes a second thought. But my question for you is based on what you've seen, how long does it take a MarTech stack to start to degrade, whether it's individual components or the entire stack? How long or how quickly does it start to degrade without a proper custodian?
Months. It happens quickly, and we have a great wealth of knowledge that came out of COVID to prove this. In that lots of companies got rid of their entire analytics teams at the start of COVID, and the thought was we can put this on ice, and then when we're through this pandemic, we'll just reboot this. What they found was that thing started falling apart almost instantly. And a few months in, it was to the point where we can't just de-thaw this thing and reboot it. And so I don't know how much of that is a driver of us not taking, again, this more long-term approach of quality and maintaining it. I think it's a huge component of it. But right now, given the current state where we're not emphasizing maintenance and buying high quality, things fall apart in the months, like incredibly quickly. If we were to invest in a more sustainable approach and really focus on the importance of maintenance and buying high quality, and when I say buying high quality, I mean that both from a people resource perspective and from a hardware software perspective. If we were to further invest in that, I think that gets drawn out further, right? If I buy a more high quality thing, if I have higher quality resources, they're going to build and maintain things that stand the test of time. We can look at history, and we can look at we're talking about houses, and I was just watching something earlier on the History Channel about some old aqueducts and waterways in Italy and other places. These things have lasted for thousands of years because of the quality that was put into it. Whereas there are houses in this area that went abandoned, 9 months ago, and it already looks like it was from like the early 1900s. It's fallen apart so quickly. And a lot of that is because of the quality that goes into the build and the quality of the maintenance of that thing. So right now, to answer your question again, months, very quickly. If we were to have a better focus on quality and maintenance, it's still going to degrade, like even the Parthenon, and like they're all falling apart, but over a much longer time period.
Okay, one more question, I promise. Okay. This quick answer question. What do you say to, if a MarTech vendor comes to you and gives you the Ron Popeil, just set it and forget it? Our product is something you could just set and let run.
See ya. I'm not interested. Right? It's a lie, right? It's
and that's what I figured you were going to say, but I wanted to.
It makes great late night television on infomercials where we buy, like, why was I up at 3 a.m. and I bought this? Do you remember? There's some funny videos on YouTube, and I have one, so it tells you I bought it. Do you remember these like machines with the 2 handles, and it's to create abs? Like you roll it out.
I had one too.
But they're so compelling, right?
They
it's
are.
Like, it's like, this is that. I'm like, it didn't work. Yeah, I mean, if I'm getting the infomercial selling pitch for a MarTech product, I'm at the point in my career where I've just kind of gotten rid of my F's to care about that, and I'm like, not interested, dude. Because I know it's a lie. I know that you're using sales tactics to sell something is going to fall apart, but you don't care because you're going to be in a different job 18 months from now. And so history should tell us that those things simply don't stand the test of time. And you know what? Fine, they're not all bad purchases, but if we're going to invest millions of dollars to build an analytics infrastructure, we should build it more like the ancient ruins that are still standing after thousands of years, and not the cheap house that was thrown up a couple years ago that's already falling apart.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
And to be honest with you, out here, and this is where we'll wrap up at, with the buying cheap stuff out here, looking at houses, I'm not looking at new construction, at buying a new house out here. I know for a fact that, how they're putting up a lot of these new developments. I'm looking for an older house.
Yeah, and we can keep going on, but it's such a great example. And not to say that all older houses were better, but there was a sense that there was more pride in the work the people building these houses were doing. And now not only is their lack of pride because it's like it's just a job, I'm going to go on to the next thing, but there's also, at least in our area, like a massive housing shortage, and so builders are like, ooh, we could take advantage of this. Like, how quick and dirty can we throw this thing up so we can build more and more houses? And
And
they
that's what
cut
they're doing.
corners, and like, this thing is, it looks really really nice and smells perfect right now. This thing is not going to look like this in a year from now. I guarantee it, because they're just lack of pride, taking shortcuts, and it's not for me. I would much rather have less things that are high quality than a house full of things that are low quality.
Exactly. Because ultimately you get what you pay for.
You get what you pay for. Yep.
Cool. So let's wrap it up there. Um, we definitely went long today, but it was a good
Yeah. It
chat.
was good.
Start of a new theme of episodes. So let's end it there. And we will catch everybody later.
See ya.
See ya.